Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My guest today is Ysabella Hazan, who's an Israeli activist. And today with Ysabella, we'll talk about the current war in Israel and the situation that is going on between the state of Israel and Hamas. Thanks for your time, Ysabella. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to speak to an Italian audience.
Well, I hope that some of my Italian viewers will actually watch it, so we're definitely on the same page. Would you like, first off, to tell us something about yourself? Because I said very briefly that you're an Israeli activist, but feel free to add whatever you want and to introduce yourself.
Of course. So I am a Jewish activist, a Jewish and Israeli activist. I fight for Jewish rights online and offline. I graduated law school last year. I have 2 degrees, and I'm pursuing my bar exam now. That's the next step. But it's a little bit difficult as my homeland is at war. I have to put that aside, and I'm going to go back probably to volunteer very soon. And during the course of my law school, I worked at the Israeli consulate in public affairs and diplomacy as an intern when I was 19. And I started a movement called Decolonized Judean. Decolonized Judean is a movement that started really because there was a lack of understanding of Jewish identity in the Jewish community and also outside. The Jewish story was being told by non-Jews, and it is up to us to reclaim our story and to tell it. So a little bit about the name. Jews are called Jews because we originate from the land of Israel. We originate from Judea. And when we were forced into diaspora, we lost a lot of, we integrated into the cultures that we were living in, but we also lost some parts of the way that we connected to our identity. And Decolonized Judaism is all about connecting to your Jewish identity through a Jewish lens, through a Jewish worldview, and it's to undo the layers of colonialism, to pretty much unprogram, to decolonize your mind and soul, spirit, and that's why I started this movement, and it has gained a lot of traction, especially in North America. And this is a little bit about me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this introduction. So let's start from the basics, because we've been a war going on in Israel for a little bit more than 1 month. So can we start from the fundamental things? Can you explain us what are the origins of this very complex situation? So what is the state of Israel? What is the West Bank? And what is the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, that's a very big question. So in order to answer this question, we have to go back 3,000 years ago. And of course, I'm going to give this through a Jewish lens. The Jewish people are indigenous to the land of Israel. Our language, our culture revolves around and comes from the land. When the Romans destroyed our temple, we were forced into exile. And a very important thing to remember is that although a lot of Jews were forced into exile and spread to all corners of the globe, into the diaspora, a lot of Jews also maintained their connection to Israel by staying in Israel. So there are some ancient communities you'll see, like the Samaritans, that are still in Israel till today. This connection has been maintained. Also, throughout thousands of years in the diaspora, there has been many movements for Jews to come back to their homeland. A lot of them weren't as successful as Zionism. Zionism is, let's define Zionism too. It's the political ideology. It's the movement that essentially brought forward the re-establishment of Israel. It was created by Theodore Herzl in the 1800s. And Zionism essentially has a definition. I know we hear this word being thrown around a lot, but Zionism is the belief, it is the movement, and it is the ideology that Jews have the right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland. So if you break down the word Zionism into 2 parts, it's that Jews have rights to sovereignty, and the second part is in our homeland. It's 2-pronged. Rights in our land, just like every other nation, and we fought for these rights throughout history. So when Jews are sent out to the diaspora, we have maintained our connection to Israel. Every year during Passover, we say next year in Jerusalem. My family, for example, spent the diaspora in Morocco. My dad and my mom, our roots are also Moroccan. And they were actually in Morocco pre-Arabization, before Islamic conquest. That's how long our roots are there. And Jews have experienced it all throughout the diaspora. So when Jews started trickling in back into Israel, important to know that a lot of Jews maintained their connection there, and Jews stayed. These movements, these immigrations are called aliyahs. There was 5 major aliyahs of Jews coming back to Israel. A lot of it that sparked it was also the anti-Semitism in Europe, the pogroms that were happening. And as Jews were returning to Israel, we were cultivating land, creating kibbutzim, purchasing land. And in 1947, the Jewish state of Israel was reestablished. Prior to 1947, there was a 1937 Peel Commission, which offered the Arab High Commission, which offered the Arabs land. They rejected it, and there have been several opportunities for a two-state solution that have been rejected. There are at least 5 serious ones. There was Camp David, there was Oslo. Oslo was in 93, Camp David was in 1978, and the situation that we are today. So there have been many wars. This is not the first war since October 7th, but October 7th was an unprovoked war by Hamas. So let's take a step back. Israel was reestablished in 1947. In 1967, there was the Six-Day War, where Israel was attacked and had to preemptively strike Egypt and Syrian armies. And in this war, Israel reclaimed also land from Jordan, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. It's called the West Bank because it is west of Jordan, but it's in reference to Jordan. They were also occupying the land, that they didn't really have rights there. So when Israel reclaimed this land, the land was later divided into 3 sections, the West Bank, into Area A, into Area B, and to Area C. Area A is solely for the Palestinian Authority. The person who rules the Palestinian Authority today is Mahmoud Abbas. It is not very much democratic. He was elected, there are no elections, and there is really like a limit of rights there. So in Area A of the West Bank, Israelis are actually not allowed to go. Before you enter, there's a huge sign that says it is against Israeli law for you to enter. You are forbidden, and it's at your own risk, essentially. I have visited these areas. And then there's Area B, which is joint control between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority will take care of educational matters, health concerns, these kinds of domestic issues, and Israel is there for security. And then Area C is under Israel, essentially. So this is a military rule situation, and this is why we're in this essentially Swiss cheese situation, where everything is all on top of each other, and it's all like as you're driving in the West Bank, it's not like what we see in the news. It's not as separated as we think it is. You could drive into Area A by accident. You'll see a sign. There is also a farm in Kalkilia that occupies land in all 3 sections of Area A, B, and C. So that's the situation there. In 2005, Israelis left Gush Katif, Gaza, under a tremendous amount of pressure from the US for peace. But Israelis really, the locals did not want to leave their land. This was an injustice that was caused to the Israeli people. The images that were there of Jews leaving the land, of Israelis leaving the land, were very hard for the Israeli public to stomach. And this is important for today because as we see Israel fighting this war against Hamas, a lot of Israelis and Jews in the diaspora, people are asking, what happened? In 2005, Israelis left. There was an opportunity for there to be an amazing Palestinian state side by side Israel. But instead, Hamas was elected, took control, similar to what happened in Nazi Germany. Hitler was elected and then democracy faded away. Hamas has been controlling Gaza since 2005. It's a terrorist group who does not care for their people, and it's now being used as a launch pad, and they're the ones who have launched the attack, the massacre, and I would go as far as to say genocide of October 7th. That's a little bit about the land, a little bit about the history. We can go more in depth. Let me know.
No, I think it was very clear and to the correct level that I was expecting. So you summarized what happens in 3,000 years in a nutshell. So what was the situation before October 7th this year among these 3 strips of land?
So essentially, before October 7th, October 6th was a ceasefire. Hamas, his goal, their raison d'etre, their reason to be, is to essentially take out Israel. They're an organization that within their charter, it says that they want to kill Jews and that they want to eliminate Israel off the map and to spread jihad. They're an extremist organization. So this is an enemy governing body that's on the border of Israel. And by the way, Gaza also shares a border with Egypt, and that border is not spoken about enough, especially now to save innocent Palestinian lives. there should be more efforts to protect them and to go into Egypt temporarily or not to get out of a conflict zone. Another note, because we didn't touch on October 7th, really, I just want to pedal back a bit before we get into your question. October 7th was a Saturday, a Jewish holiday, and it was also the holiday of Simchat Torah. The attack that occurred on October 7th left 1,400 Israelis murdered, and it was an attack where Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Israel and caused terror. The terror that we are seeing is unspeakable. It is hard to even discuss. And you'll see a lot of Jews in the diaspora mourning. It is a shock because to us, Israel meant never again. And this slogan, never again, is a slogan that we need to put into action. It's not just words. And for Jews, this was shocking because for us, Israel is never again. And to see this happen in Israel is something that was like a stab in the heart. It made the pain even that much worse. With the murder, there was also 250 hostages that were taken. And I want to emphasize, Hamas attacked people. Hamas attacked civilians. Not military targets only, but people, raping women, beheading babies, putting babies in ovens. It was horrors that we haven't seen since the Holocaust. This is what happened on October 7th, which caused the war that we're seeing right now. So I think that's an important thing to mention, along with the 250 hostages that are now taken. Side note. So that's what's happening now. Now, to answer what was happening before, there was a sense of a ceasefire, a calmness. In 2014, there was a war, Tzuk there was 2021, there was another popcorn conflict. Rockets are fired somewhat often by Hamas. Hamas is backed by Iran, who plays a huge role in this. They support them, Hezbollah as well. And before October 7th, the situation was that there was rockets being thrown into Israel, but it wasn't, there was this sense of status quo where rockets were being thrown, there was some tensions, but Israel had left completely. And there was also work permits that were issued to Palestinians living in Gaza, and they would come in and work into Israel. Some of those Palestinians who had work permits are the ones who committed the atrocities on October 7th. That's also an important thing to mention. So before October 7th, the relationship between Israel and Gaza was essentially a status quo situation where Hamas was ruling there. They would recharge, start a new conflict like we saw in 2021, some quiet times, and it was essentially the Israeli strategy of containment. This containment strategy has proved to be ineffective, in my opinion, because it is not a long-term solution. As for the situation in the West Bank, as I mentioned, it's the Palestinian Authority that's ruling in Area A and B. And there are also work permits issued by Israel for Palestinians in the West Bank, in Area A and Area B, to come in and to work into Israel and provide economic opportunity. There are some Hamas cells in the West Bank, and Mahmoud Abbas, is trying to control that so he can have more political power. But we see that that it is a growing movement. Of course, there are innocent Palestinians who I would say the majority do not want to be under Hamas or Palestinian Authority rule. They oppress their own people. You cannot be gay. You cannot be free. There's no freedom of expression. It's very strict, draconian society. And we need to free the land from this.
Well, how long has been Hamas planning this attack, in your opinion, as far as you know?
So that's a great question. In my opinion, I would assume quite a long time. And the reason I say this is not just because of the scale, but we see the preparation. We see that when Hamas came in, they had documents. In the documents, they had maps of Kibbutz Be'eri. They had maps of areas of Israel. And we see even there was a situation in the Kibbutz Be'eri where someone who worked in the kibbutz had provided information to Hamas terrorists about who lived in what house. Did they or did they not have a dog? How many people live there? So there was due diligence that was done beforehand. As well, we see that the New York Times, CNN, and other mainstream news organizations have come under fire by reports released by Honest Reporting that journalists came in with Hamas And these journalists, even though they're independent, they're contracted by these news outlets, and they were there to take pictures. So there was a coordination. So this is not something that happened by fluke. It wasn't something that happened overnight. There was something planned significantly, and we see that Iran significantly have helped them with this. I saw a report that it was about 2 years in the making, but I think for now it's we don't have answers, and this is something that Israel is going to have to look into and investigate. But right now, I don't think Israel has the luxury of doing that. It's really just a fight for our survival and a fight to make sure that the hostages are returned and to secure Israel's borders from enemy, and a very strong enemy.
Well, what puzzles me here is that we have two wars going on very close to each other. One of them is Ukraine and the other one is Israel. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we had known in advance that that was going to happen because of intelligence reports by the US mostly. So what I don't get here is how come the Israeli intelligence was defied like that?
It's a great question. I think that like 9/11, like other terrorist attacks that have occurred, all we hear about is security failures, so we don't hear about the security and intelligence miracles that happen day to day. Like Israel has been stopping terrorist attacks across the world in the diaspora right now still. One recently was actually in Brazil. So we only hear about security failures. How this went under the radar, I wish I knew the answers. There'll definitely be an inquiry, and I wish I had something more to give to you. But another thing that that was mentioned is that a lot of the attack that was planned was done solely through word of mouth, and they limited technological communications. So that is how it aided into going under the radar. I also heard that there's protests on the border of Gaza often, that during these protests they were planting bombs, slowly doing recognition under the guise of a protest. So that too was a long time in the making. Also, there was terror tunnels that are being built. Terror tunnels have aided this attack tremendously. These terror tunnels are built through money that is from the European Union, from the UN, from other Western countries. This humanitarian aid is given directly to build tunnels and not the people of Gaza. So we see humanitarian aid that's misappropriated. We see a technological avoidance to communicate. So these two things, as well as Iran's help, these three things have definitely aided in it going under the radar. And this is a question that I'm sure are on a lot of people's minds, Israelis. But one thing's for sure, if Israel could have stopped this, I have no doubt they would have.
Also because the terrorists only have to succeed once, while intelligence,
good point.
Yeah, intelligence have to succeed every single time.
Right.
So you've already mentioned foreign support that Hamas received. You mentioned Iran and you mentioned Hezbollah, but I think also probably Russia is behind them. I don't know. What do you think?
Undoubtedly, we also saw China bringing in their ships into the sea, even though they have a shallow navy. It's not going to be as useful, but the fact that they brought it was definitely a sign, a huge signal. So we see that alliance, Russia, China, and Hezbollah, Iran. It's of course plays a role. They definitely have influence. We know that Iran is definitely behind the attack of October 7th, and I think that there should be more pressure on Iran instead of Iran being elected to the UN Human Rights Council this past week. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable, especially since we know that their fingerprints are all over the attack, and not only that, they're oppressing their own people. So I don't know how Iran made it to the UN Human Rights Council. So talking about support from Western countries and the war in Russia, there needs to be more of a pressure there, especially on Iran. They're pretty much laughing from afar and using their proxies all throughout the region to cause terror and to cause havoc. But we see countries like the UAE, who have condemned Hamas, who are traditional in nature, and who have not succumbed to this extremism. And I do believe that the Middle East right now is in two. There is the side of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, who want peace with Israel, who are tired of this, of Iran causing havoc in the region, of this division. These are countries who want tolerance, who who are traditional, who are Muslim, and who have these values, who aren't like Hamas or Hezbollah. And I think that right now we should be also cultivating those relationships.
Well, in your opinion, how should Israel react to such an attack? Because, of course, you cannot just like randomly bomb the two strips of land, because they would kill civilians as well. So the situation is very complex. What should Israel's reaction be like?
So I would like to clarify something. A lot of times we see in the news some misinformation, for example, especially online. Carpet bombing, it's sometimes painted as though Israel is a toddler and responded with rage and ferocity that was uncalculated. This is a lie. It took Israel 3 weeks to respond via a ground invasion. This is a very calculated army who is working in war zones and in conditions that we haven't seen before. Tunnels. Gaza is divided into two levels, civilian level, and under that is Hamas, is a terrorist who hide beneath civilians, who use mosques, who use schools, who use hospitals, who use houses of people as military bases. So in terms of Israel responding, I think Israel needs to take the utmost care to ensure that civilian casualties are minimized, because these are real people who have real suffering and who do not deserve to be in this war, but are because of Hamas. And it is because of Hamas that we're in this situation. I think it's an important thing to emphasize. So when it comes to Israel's response, I think Israel has been excellent in targeting solely Hamas targets. We see Hamas terrorists using ambulances as taxis. This makes Israel's job significantly more dangerous and more difficult, especially when Israel is sending in troops on the ground. These are Hamas doesn't dress in an army uniform. They're in civilian clothes. It makes it even harder to identify the terrorists, especially when they're hiding behind civilians and they're mimicking themselves as civilians. So the question of how Israel should respond on the ground, I think they're taking tremendous amount of precautions. For example, they drop leaflets that tell Gazans to leave the conflict zone, to clear the way. They call beforehand. We've heard a lot of calls between Israeli officials, between the army and local Gazans to clear the area, to minimize civilian casualties as much as possible. We see knocker bombs, a fake bomb that just makes a sound in order for people to clear the area. We see humanitarian passages secured by the army because Hamas will shoot at their own people, and Hamas will also encourage them to stay, because this is a PR war for Hamas as well. They want to see more casualties, and we cannot be trusting the number of the Palestinian Health Ministry because it's run by Hamas. So when it comes to Israel's actions, I think so far securing the humanitarian passage is a positive. I think the actions like I mentioned, the leaflets, the knocker bombs that just make a sound, the calls, all these efforts to minimize casualties, I think should continue. In terms of a response, I do believe that Israel should no longer allow for extremists to be their neighbors. They're not worthy neighbors. And I think this is a mistake that we have learned time and time again. Netanyahu recently said that he does not want the PA to be in Gaza. We saw what happened. Hamas was elected at first, and we saw what's happening in the West Bank currently now as well. The PA has a pay-for-slay policy. They also pay terrorists. The Palestinian Authority also encourages terrorism. So what I think Israel should do is that they should establish a strong enough deterrence to weaken Hamas and others who have any intention of harming Israeli people and civilians. That includes Hezbollah, and that includes all of Israel's enemies. So I think that, number one, eliminating Hamas is something that Israel must do. And another thing that I think Israel should be doing is more efforts to eliminate the ideology. Because even though Hamas will be ultimately, hopefully so, eradicated, the ideology won't. So there needs to be efforts to create more conversations with local Palestinians, de-radicalization, especially in school systems. We see books by the Palestinian Authority and by Hamas who glorify terrorists like Leila Khaled. And there needs to be an effort to create more conversations, because I think this is how we're going to eradicate the ideology. So it's a two-pronged. The military objectives, I'm not going to come on here and say that I'm an expert in military strategy, but I know for sure that Hamas needs to leave. And the second part is to make life, especially better for Palestinians, with Israelis.
So, based on what you've just explained us, of course, not all Palestinians are terrorists. So the civilians in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank are victims of Hamas as well.
Of course, Hamas is holding their people hostage. They're holding Israelis hostage, 250 of them, but they're also holding their people as hostages. And we need to really help amplify the voices within Gaza because Hamas is not allowing them to speak and they are oppressing them. And they deserve better. They deserve to live with dignity, to have freedom, to have access to basic necessities, and to have a government that takes care of them. Hamas made it clear in their remarks that they're not here to take care of Palestinians in Gaza. They're here to just eradicate Israel. That's their goal, to remove Israel from the map. That's never going to happen. The Palestinians in Gaza and also in the West Bank deserve better leadership.
Well, do you think that Israel maybe deserves better leadership as well? Because, for instance, Netanyahu doesn't have a good name in the West.
I think that's a question of internal domestic Israeli politics. I think that Netanyahu is definitely a figure that's been in power for a long time. And what matters to me is whether or not Israelis support him, not whether or not people in the West support him. And I think that's where it's very important for us to aim the conversation. I know that a lot of countries in the West think that they could tell Israel what they should and shouldn't do and have a major influence, and they shouldn't, especially America, in Israeli policy. So to me, the fact that some Western countries don't like Netanyahu might be a positive because he is opposing some of their insistence to impose their will on local Israelis. I'm not going to come on here and say I support or I don't support Netanyahu. I'm not yet Israeli, even though I'm in the process of making my aliyah, and I'm very excited about that. I think it matters what Israelis think about him. And of course, Israel needs a better, I think, not just leadership, but political system. I think the political system in Israel is one that is underworks. It's always in a state of emergency since 1947. And elections that are happening, every couple of months is of course a very healthy democracy, but clearly something is wrong if it's happening this often. And we need to have this conversation amongst Israelis when our enemies pretty much allow us, because it's hard to heal ourselves and to grow when you're always under attack.
Well, you're the first Israeli guest I have on the channel. I had many Iranians, and I would like to ask you something that I asked all the Iranians. Do you think the West should do something more? Should do more to support you guys, to support Israel against Hamas?
I want to say one thing: the support from the Iranian community to the Israeli community during this war has been inspiring.
I know.
I have seen so much. Every rally, every online, offline, it's truly beautiful. And a note on that, it goes to show that the people are speaking up. The people are connected. It's not about the governments. Israelis, Jews, Iranians in the diaspora are really united against the terror that we're seeing, against the extremism. And I think it's beautiful. So thank you to every Iranian, to the Iranian community for really standing with us. We stand with you. And to answer your question about the West support, I think the West needs to be very careful in how they support Israel, because is it support or is it control? Because when we see the US sending warships, of course, right now that's a great deterrence. But with that support, there needs to be an understanding that Israel needs to do what they have to do. Pressuring Israel for a ceasefire is a disaster, because the only thing that will do is it will help Hamas recharge. A ceasefire doesn't mean an end to war. A ceasefire means the continuance of a longer, prolonged, more difficult war. So when it comes to support from the West, I think the most important support, besides financial or military, would be a cultural and diplomatic support, especially within local Western countries. I live in Canada, in Montreal. This week, we have seen an unprecedented amount of violent anti-Semitic attacks. The police are doing what they have to do, and they've been doing an incredible job at trying to protect the community, but the politicians need to speak up. So when it comes to support from the West, I think local support is very important. We see the rallies that are happening across the West. A lot of these rallies aren't peaceful, they're violent. It's sending a very massive signal to Jews that we are not comfortable, we are not welcome, with slogans like "from the river to the sea." That means the ethnic cleansing of Jews from the land. It's from the river to the sea. That's the entirety of Israel. And I'll give Montreal as an example. Concordia University this past week, students were punched in the face. They had a Jewish students had a table to honor the hostages, to bring awareness, to help bring them back home. It was a Shabbat dinner table. That table was completely destroyed by the end of the event. The police had to come. There was layers of police outside the school, and people were arrested. This is not okay in Montreal. There was my former high school that was shot with a gun, shot up last week. Another school, Yeshiva Gedola in Montreal, shot twice. This is all within a week, and that's honestly not even the only examples that I could give that happened this past week, just in Montreal. So when it comes to support from the West, I think that they need to look locally and start making it safer for the Jews living in their communities. And not just that, it's by rhetoric. We have let a lot of rhetoric go unchecked. Calling Jews foreigners or colonizers to the land that we are from is hateful. We see the process of violence and anti-Semitism. First, it starts with complete denial. It starts with a lie. It starts with a lie like Jews are not from Israel. It starts by denying our connection to the land that we are from. This is unheard of. You dig in land, you find ancient artifacts. This is beyond. It's ahistorical. And then there's a dehumanization process, and this process goes by making Jews into bloodthirsty people who don't belong on the land, who are foreigners. All these things that end up making the case to justify an attack like we saw on October 7th. Of course, it's unjustifiable, but you'll see lawyers, you'll see prominent academics will rationalize this hate. And something that's very special and unique about Jew hatred is that you don't have to be ignorant to be a Jew hater. A lot of the times, Heidegger, he was a Nazi, a huge philosopher. Anti-Semites are educated. And this kind of rhetoric that goes unchecked is extremely dangerous, not just to Jews, but also to Western civilization at large. So I think support from the West also needs to start happening locally to, free speech is not hate speech. And we need to start really changing the narrative here and amplifying Jewish voices, because the police can do what they have to do. But if you can't walk around the street with your Star of David and feel safe, it's not okay.
What do you expect will happen in the next few weeks? How will the situation evolve?
Okay, so the next few weeks, I would hope and I would pray that the hostages are brought back to Israel and brought back home. I suspect that with the pressure from the US on Egypt, that some Palestinians will be able to freely seek refuge there. These are all hopes. In the upcoming weeks, I do think it's going to be a longer war than what we've seen before, because of the nature of the war, because of the nature that Hamas is hiding behind civilians, hiding behind hospitals, as I mentioned. This is very dense populated areas. So I think in the next few weeks, the war will still be happening. I think Hezbollah will unfortunately increase their rockets and their missiles. Yemen declared war on Israel as well. They are in a massive humanitarian crisis. They shouldn't be focusing on Israel at all, but they did. Well, the Houthis did declare war. So I think in the next few weeks, the war will still be happening. I think that the momentum and within Israel, there will be a continuous support to eradicate Hamas. It's very hard for Israeli public to stomach the loss of life. That's something that we've seen before. I don't know if if we keep losing Israelis, how that will go about the Israeli public, if there'll be pressure to maybe put an end to it. But I think that Israelis have had enough. So I do think that the war will be prolonged in the upcoming weeks. The day after the war, though, that's up in the air. One thing's for sure, I think Israel should take responsibility for the land in order to protect both Palestinians and Israelis.
Well, this is probably the most complex situation in the whole world. So what do you see as a long-term solution? I keep hearing about two states for two different people. What do you think? Or what? Feel free to propose whatever solution you would like to see.
So I don't have the solution, that's for sure. I don't think anybody has had a perfect solution yet. But I think the two-state solution is like communism. It looks nice on paper, but in practice, it is not feasible. And the reason I say this is because the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in what we've seen. What happens when Israel gives up land? We see in the West Bank, radicalism takes control. The people, the Palestinians, are living in poorer conditions as opposed to Israeli Arabs who have representation in Knesset and government, who are doctors, who are lawyers. There's even an Israeli Arab on the Supreme Court. So in terms of quality of life for Arabs and for Palestinians, I think that the PA and Hamas aren't respectable leaders or leadership or governments or terrorist groups take care of their people. I think that, so first of all, I don't have the answer about what the solution should be, but what I do have the answer towards is how these solutions aren't sustainable, whether it's the two-state solution or other options that I've seen. I think that there's no perfect plan. Regarding the two-state solution, whenever Israel has given up land, not only is it an injustice to locals, to Israelis who are deeply connected to the land, it has proven to be ineffective. So whether it is in the West Bank, we see the disaster that's happening there right now under the Palestinian Authority. There is no freedom, there is no equal rights, there is no justice for local Palestinians living there. Hamas, in 2005, when Israel withdrew their people, forcibly removed them from the land, we see what happened there. It has become a launch pad for terror. So the proof is in whenever Israel gives up land in a situation where there is nothing planned beforehand and just says, let's hope for the best under pressure from the West, it has not been effective. October 7th happened. I don't think Israel should be giving up land to neighbors who not only have proven to not want to be neighbors, but they also don't want it. We see what's happening, and we see what the Palestinians in the diaspora and also Palestinian leadership is saying on the ground, whether it's Hamas or whether it's the PA. They don't want a two-state solution. So the more that we encourage a two-state solution, I don't see it going anywhere. It's a solution that is not a solution because it does not fulfill the aspirations of the Palestinian people. They don't want this two-state solution. They have made it abundantly clear. And I think more and more Israelis don't want it either, to be honest. We see that giving up land hasn't been effective. And we see that Palestinians don't want this solution. Israel has been ready to make very serious and very difficult concessions. Israel was ready to accept the 1937 Peel Commission, which gave 17% of land to Israel and the rest to Arabs. This was a very hard concession, but we said, okay. Again, under Ehud Barak, so many opportunities for a two-state solution, and they have all been rejected. So the two-state solution, in my opinion, is dead, especially because the Palestinians don't want it, and I think more and more Israelis don't want it either, and because we saw what happened on October 7th. I don't think the two-state solution will be effective because of that. The one-state solution also proposes several problems, namely demographics. How is that going to work? Is there going to be an Israel if the majority of the people living in the land aren't Israelis or aren't Jewish? Is it still going to be a Jewish democracy? Will the Arabs or the Palestinians want to be part of Israel? is that even something that they want? So that's another issue with the two-state solution, with the one-state solution, I mean, sorry. So both these proposals, two-state and one-state, have very serious criticisms of, and I don't think are a standing solution. I do think, though, that there needs to be more efforts to create conversations between Israelis and with Palestinians to create a solution on the land in the future for us. The biggest roadblock to the two-state solution was the right of return every single time. And there needs to be compromises on both sides. On both sides, of course, we need to compromise. But I don't think Israel should be compromising on any more land. It has proven to be ineffective. And what is the point if we're going to see October 7th happen again? That's what Hamas has said. They're ready to do October 7th over and over again. And I don't think, President Biden had mentioned that he would like to see a Palestinian state after this war in Gaza. What message does that send to radicals? It sends a message that once we commit an unspeakable massacre, we get to acquire more land. That is not the way to justice. That is not the way to peace. And I don't think that's the way to go about it. It was a little bit everywhere, my answer. I'm sorry, but it's just, I don't really connect with the two-state solution as much as maybe I used to when I was younger.
No problem. Your explanation was very correct and precise. Also because if Hamas says on his agenda that they want to cancel the state of Israel, how can a two-state solution be a solution? They would be still willing to attack Israel. And also you mentioned during this discussion that we had that Hamas is backed by Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia, who are different subjects in different lands, different countries. Therefore, also having Hamas in a different country would make no difference.
Exactly. So I think the war that we're fighting now is also an ideological one. It's a rejection from having a Jewish presence in the region. And we see it time and time again when different terrorist groups emerge and they make their declarations very clear. I think a lot of Israelis desperately wanted peace and were ready for those very serious concessions, like removing local Israelis from Gaza in 2005. The locals did not want to leave, but ultimately the people of Israel essentially accepted it, and it was a disaster. It's a disaster. And this trust in giving up land, Israelis I don't think are willing to do this anymore. Not only because we feel deeply connected to this land, but because we saw what happened. It's no longer theoretical. It is in practice. This is the situation.
Well, Ysabella, many thanks for your time again. I think that you provided us with a very precious and precise explanation, and that you set the point straight about things that in the news are usually conveyed in a very confusing way. So I think that you made the whole picture very clear for us all.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great speaking with you.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.